Okay, awesome. Good morning, everybody. I am here to talk about going fine free. Let's start with a little audience participation. Raise your hand if you work at a library that lends out items to patrons. Okay, now keep your hand raised. Why'd everyone drop their hand? Audience participation, come on, keep your hand raised. Lower your hand if you charge fines for items for your patrons. So if you have fines, lower your hand. Oh, good. So we still have a lot of fine-free people in the room. Okay. So my fine-free build will be probably different than how you guys went fine-free. The best thing about Koha is it's very customizable, and there's a lot of things you can do with it. Some probably wrong, and you're going to point at me and laugh. But that's what I'm here for, is to show you what not to do. Let's go with these slides. There we go. So April 4th, 2022 is when we went fine free, pretty recent. We wanted to go the first of the month, but there was a lot of talk that that might not work out for us with a lot of our announcements. April 1st in the US is April Fool's Day, and that's when we play jokes on each other. So we decided not to send out a bunch of stuff that said April 1st was fine free day. So it was April 4th. We sent out all the ravens, all the messenger pigeons, all the proper birds you're supposed to send out when you're doing announcements. And we're now living in the fine-free glory days of not having fines. How did we get there, though? It's a long and arduous road. We had to talk to the city. We had to talk to the finance department. We had to talk to a lot of people. It was a lot of work. I could talk for hours about that, but that's not why we're here. That would be a whole different presentation. We're going to talk just about Koha. So how do we go fine free? So this is in circulation fine rules. There's a fine amount, and you just put zeros in all of them, and you are fine free. We did it. I could end the presentation here, and we just, George would be very angry at me for only going like a couple minutes. And as you notice in your Koha little book, that's not all we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about some other things. On the back end of Koha, here's some other things you can change that deal with fines. I didn't, and you'll notice like one of them, this is from our system, and one is charge fines, and I still have calculate and charge fines listed, so it doesn't really matter. As long as you have all those goose eggs in the baskets, it's not going to charge fines. But here's some more things you could mess with if you wanted your system to be correct. One other thing we wanted to do was, now that we're not charging fines, we also want to forgive the fines that are already in the system. So came up with a little report to look at the account lines in our database. The very important thing is where amount outstanding is greater than 0, because you don't want to list all of the paid fines. And then once we had that, we kind of had to filter out some stuff for our library. Our max fine was $20, so anything below that is probably a fine. That little less than greater than is not. So we charge a processing fee of $13.50 for all the lost items. So we want to keep the processing fee in. Anything that was lost, anything that was billed, we also used to charge a $5.35 billing fee. And some of this has to deal with migration. We just migrated to Koha in 2019, so it still has a lot of pre-Koha fines in there. Anything that says lost material fees, anything that looks like it has replacement in the notes or lost. That N stands for new cards. We used to charge $1 for a new card, and so we kind of kept that in there. And anything that was charging for book sale, we also kept in. Then once you have all that information, you need to find a way to get rid of the fines. I don't know how to do that, so I sent Bywater that report, and they did a thing, and now we don't have fines in it. You're a system administrator, you might know how to actually do that yourself. Then you have to update everything in Koha that mentions fines. At least that's what I had to do. So I had to update our notices, the Koha catalog, any of our receipts, and then a bunch of other people at our library had to update a bunch of other things. And we just found something a month ago that mentioned fines. And although we should have changed it, we just decided to look the other way and said, we're done with this. This is way too much things to reprint. So how are we holding patrons accountable? We're using the overdue notice and status triggers. There is a restrict column right there. And if you have that checked, what it does is once it sends the notice, it adds a restriction to that patron's account, and they cannot depending on your preferences, set up. They can't check out items and they can't put holds on items. And that's what we're doing. We have it set to 7 days for a first notice. It's very customizable. You can put that restriction on your second notice or your third notice, just how generous you want to be. We put 7 days, and that's it's pretty generous, but it's a holdover from a lot of other things. We have a 3-day grace period on all our overdue items, and that was mostly due to a while ago where Koha did not have digest notices for advanced due items. And so we did a workaround and we gave everyone a 3-day grace period. And then we also don't have automatic check-in. And so we wanted to give staff a couple of extra days before we started restricting patrons. And since it was a new system, we just wanted to give them a couple more days just in case they get used to it. So we landed on 7 days. Once an item is 7 days overdue, it blocks your account. You can't do anything with the library. And to make sure that works through, you also have to talk to people that library services you use to make sure that restriction will block them. Previously, we had restricted patrons at $25, and now that we're doing this new restriction, we wanted to make sure it was going to block those services for patrons. So the one thing I was excited about doing this presentation is it gave me an excuse to sit down and go through our stats and try to find stats that prove that going fine free is helping our library. As you're going to see, those graphs don't really work out for me. And I'll show you why. So these all seemed reasonable things for me to try to find out ways that are making the library better. The first one is number of items marked lost by month. I have these giant spikes that help out nobody. Most of them are migrations. When we migrate, we just mark a bunch of things lost. And then between April the 14th to 16th, or the 2014 through 2016, we didn't actually mark items lost. We just left them on the patron's account and and then charged them. And then when that big spike is, we decide, oh, maybe we should mark things lost. We're going to try to remove them from the system eventually. So we actually set a lost, I think it was 90 days lost. And then COVID-19 hit. And so we stopped marking things lost. And then on April 2022, we were like, maybe we should mark things lost again. And so that's why that huge spike is there. And then way at the end is now us marking things lost on a regular basis. So maybe later I'll have good stats using this. This is kind of looking at the same thing. Number of lost charges on patrons' accounts, migration, COVID-19, not really good information there. And then now we're actually have regular data. Oops, did I skip one? No. All right, number of checkouts. Maybe the number of checkouts due to our change is going to increase. Well, not really. If I kind of kept used just a few months, I can be like, yes, it is going up. But looking at broad data, not really. We had better circulation numbers before COVID, which is that huge drop. And then even last summer, we had better numbers. There's other factors going into this. We did not just get rid of fines. We also made a few other changes to kind of bargaining with the city to go with and to hold patrons accountable. First-time patrons can only check out 5 items now. That's their max. We used to not have a limit. So if it was your first time in the library from another city, you can check out 200 items and not come back to us. And we decided maybe this is time to change that. And so summer being a time of new patrons coming in, but now we're restricting them from checking out what they wanted. And so that could also lead to this. We also lowered the number of renewals from 5 to 3. So that might also be something that could affect these numbers. Okay, so this graph, I finally actually got something. Number of items returned more than 30 days overdue. I'm looking at the Koha check-in date. And although I still have spikes, if you notice at the far end, it does look like more items are being returned that were long overdue. Now we're considering 30 days. So that's good news. And then this last graph I made because I kind of wanted definite proof that removing fines is helping. So as you can see, this is on the left side is no with overdue fines. On the right side is fine free. And those lines represent Happiness, and they're going up. Look, guys, they're going up. Patrons are happy, staff are happy, everyone's happier now. So here's a good graph that you want to show people. I was talking to someone and I wished I thought about this beforehand, but I wish I had something on the slide to represent things that were thrown at staff before fines or when we had fines, or quotes from staff about how mad patrons get. If you notice, patrons are still not as happy as staff, but just patrons, you can never make them happy. So problems we've run into, I'm going to go over a few things. Some of them are koha related. Some of them are what are on me because koha did not do what I wanted it to do or what I thought it did. And so maybe that'll help you because you'll think the same thing. The overdue notices that send out and restrict have different timings than this lost, marking things lost. It's a well-known bug out there. I listed the bug down there. Long overdue cron job does not follow the library's calendar and skips close days. And you can have the overdue notice, the thing that restricts, use that library calendar, and then trying to line them up seems very hard. And so to kind of remedy that, we just mark things 10 days later than what we actually say we're going to mark things. I think on paper it's 30 days. But because notices and holidays and Sundays, we just don't want to mark something lost before they get a notice that says, hey, we're marking this lost. It would be great if they could line up. Bywater has a cool blog post about using the emailer plugin. So you can, when you mark it lost, that seemed like too much, just added a couple of days to the long. The process removal is not, so about using that restrict is it's great. On the overdue trigger, there is a system that when the item, we can take off the restriction. There's also koha properties, the refund lost item, refund the lost item. So if they've been after 30 days and they return that item, that price of the item gets refunded and their account can be used to remove that processing fee that our library is forced. It would be was automatic. Bug down there is ability to mark processing default refund when item is found. I understand that would lead to problems. Say we don't want to refund the product if it was paid for, and we're telling koha to. It's like a whole workflow problem. But to fix that, I have a report that looks at all lines and sees that bill that only have a processing fee, and then I have to go through and manually delete them or waive them. Okay, so this one's on me. I didn't realize when koha told me all overdues, it meant all overdues. So, like I said, we restrict something that's 7 days overdue, and the system preference says allow overdue restrictions triggered by sent notices to be cleared automatically when all overdue items are returned by a patron. And that means all overdues, not the ones that trigger the restriction. And so we wanted a 3-day grace period. So if someone's in that 3-day grace period and still has that item kept out, it's considered overdue by koha. And if they return that really, really late item, it doesn't remove the restriction automatically because they still have that 3-day overdue item. And the bug there is allow patrons to have overdue items that would not result in debarment when removing overdue debarments. And that's kind of what we want to see, what I would like to see. So I don't have to remove that restriction. And then another thing, return means returned. Should have known this. I just assumed koha didn't do it this way. So when I want to mark a lost item as returned I want the item to fall off the patron's check-in when when it is marked lost. That's just how our workflow was in the past. And it makes it easier for our collection manager to remove items that have been lost a long, long time because we want those out of the system. Back in that old graph you saw, we used to not mark things lost. And so we had like 3 years of lost items just floating in our system that staff would have to kind of just filter through when looking for items. So we want to mark those out of the system. And if it's checked out to someone, koha won't let you do it through the batch modifications. So we want it off the person's account. And then if they return that really, really late item, it doesn't remove the restriction automatically because they still have that 3-day overdue item. And that's kind of what we want to see, what I would like to see. So I don't have to remove that restriction. And so I found this cool system preference that I can mark it as returned and clear it off this person's account once we mark it lost. So we don't have to go in and mark it lost by ourselves. The problem is when it returns it off their check-in and charges the account, it returns it. And that allow overdue restrictions triggered by notices to clear automatically when items are returned also counts that as a return. So after the 40 days, it marks it lost, returns it, removes the restriction of the overdue notices because all the items are returned. Yeah, no, that was going to happen. So found that out. So there's a bug for it, ability to remove lost items from patrons' accounts without checking it in. It's kind of what we would like to do. Our workaround of this is we just went back, since it charges them, we are now using the do not allow patrons access if they have a certain fine amount. So that's how we worked around it. But I go back, staff like that huge restriction. We use CSS to make it bigger so they don't have to figure out, they don't have to try to look for the fine amount. Somehow that is harder to see than that huge restriction. So they like that there instead of that little fine. So that would be nice. We could keep that restriction there. And then going back to my graph of how I proved that more items were coming back. Well, they weren't, because returned means returned, and I was using that return date. So technically I reran that report, taking out the 41 days. So that would be things that this koha marked lost, and it's now kind of following the normal data. So that's really something like we don't have proof that libraries that removing fines is making our books come back. It kind of just doesn't change things, and that's also a good thing. Like, it's not like removing fines, all your books are going to go away. But right now we just don't have data that shows it's making it better about books coming back. All right, I'm done talking. Any questions? Or is anyone else going fine free and they want to share what they're doing or what I'm doing wrong? I am here as well.
Michael, I have a question for you. A couple of them, actually.
Yes.
First one, you talked about triggering restrictions. We tried that, and we had a lot of complaints from patrons. We had trouble with that, and we ended up turning that off. Have you had a lot of complaints or any complaints from patrons when you triggered restrictions for those on those notices?
We've had some, and it's mostly patrons that have a lot of items out, and only if maybe one item is being blocked because of a hold. Now, really, they're angry because they expect nothing to change. Like they just want to come in, check out. They're like, why is it being blocked? It's like, oh, you have a hold that's a week, 2 weeks overdue. You need to bring that back. And they're like, well, whatever, I should be able to check out. And that's really what we're running into. It's not someone that's angry because they're following the rules. It's more a patron expects to just be able to check out and then pay the fine. They're used to the old way of just having to pay a fine or talking their way out of a fine when it comes up. And so we haven't run into a scenario that has caused us to rethink that. And I think it is just the buffer we're giving everyone is that 7 days instead of it being, the 3 days. I think it's enough that we can say, oh, but you're a week overdue, and they, it's on them. They're kind of feeling like, oh, that is kind of a ridiculous amount of time for me to just keep a book. Maybe I should bring it back. And I think that's helping us. It's just the amount of buffer we give there.
Okay. The second one, going back to, you had a slide that said returned items are equal returned.
Yeah.
Or returned means returned. Yes. Okay. So this one we've had particular problems with, especially because we have some libraries that go to collections. And so we've had a difficult time with a balancing act with that, because, in some respects, yes, we want items that are checked in to have those fines removed, but if they've gone to collections, we have no way of blocking that. And so we've run into issues where items are returned and we have no way of knowing before checking it in, oh, this has gone to collections, we shouldn't check it in, kind of thing. So it removes the fines. we've also run into the issue with this particular setting in that, we want people to be able to, we want staff to be able to delete items that have been lost for a long time, but finding the balance of where to do that, because we've had also items checked in. We've had items checked in, they've been removed, and there's this mysterious fine on the account if we turn certain settings on or off. And then on the flip side of that, we've had people turn things in and the charges have been removed, and there's no accounting of that item ever being lost at that point. So this one has been particularly challenging, especially with today's workflows with going to collections. There's just no mechanism in Koha for collections. Have you do you have any collections experience?
So thankfully we don't use collections. It's just all the library, ourselves. So we don't have to worry about that. The other thing, yes, you were talking about that. We don't mark things out of the system 6 months until they're marked lost 6 months. And since we did that in April, we haven't run into that because that would be this, next month. So yes, we'll probably run into that problem soon of people returning items that were marked removed. That has happened even when we didn't do this, of removing items. It usually ends up to me, like this book isn't in the system, and then I have to look through all our fines and see if that book is mentioned in any of the fines, and then waive it if it is a lost fine, or a lost or damaged. So yes, that has happened, and it does leave more work for me as like the library system admin. A lot of the stuff automating just causes more work for me, which isn't great, but like removing processing fees, that's now my job to do at the end of, at the beginning or end of the month, is to go through and run that report and see what processing fee is and remove it. It does save time overall, but it does fall back on the Koha system administrator to do a lot of that upkeep and work, it seems. Yeah.
When you decided to go fine free, did you make a distinction between actual late fees and replacement fees for items that just weren't returned, period, after the?
Yes, and the person at our library that does all our announcements, that was one paragraph of the announcement was for patrons to, like, there is a difference between fines and lost items. I forget what she called it, but yes, that was one of the points of almost every fine free announcement was, we're still charging for lost and damaged items. That is different than fines. Yeah.
Hey, Michael.
Hey.
So I have a question.
Okay.
About your first time checkout limitation, because for us, we have that as well. We have threats, but it's really a big lie because they could actually check out more. Is there a system preference that?
So what we do is we made a new patron category that was like whatever the category we wanted it as, so adult or child, and then we just put new in front of it, adult new, and we set the checkout limit to 5. And then I talked to the Wizards Bywater and said, hey, when the next day I want a cron to run to set the new category to what it's supposed to be. So from adult new, it would be changed to adult overnight. And so we don't have a max limit for 24 hours. It's just that max limit is that day. And then the cron runs overnight and then changes it all to the patron category it should be.
So like the next day they could come in
and the
check
next
out.
day they could come in. Yeah.
Okay.
But when we were looking at data, it really was just users coming in first time, looking at their creation date. That was the checkout date of all the lost items, and they just didn't come back. I forget how many, but it was a big portion of our lost items were just first time users that didn't come back. And so we decided, so if they do come back the second day and check out 200, at least they came back. There is a notorious patron in our system that came in from a city near Dallas, which is about an hour away from us, and checked out like 200 items and never returned it. So it was one of those decisions. Well, I guess if they want to drive an hour back to do it, we'll
I think they came to my
with that.
library too.
Yeah, they might do that, but
We're neighbors.
yeah, but at least they may, they came back. And then it was the idea that, even if we would have to set it to a really long limit or a really long time for that limit to stop that from happening. So it would have, and they still probably would have done it. So the one thing with our library setup is we don't have a limit on most items. And so that you can check out as many books as you want. We only limit we have on DVDs is 10. And so we run into the thing of people driving and checking out like 200 items and not returning them. And so that's really what we're trying. And we've only been on it for, like I said, 6 months. So we'll see. I didn't pull data for that yet, but we'll see if that actually is helping.
Okay, I have one more question.
Yeah.
Did you say you have automatic renew?
We do.
Okay, so one of the things that frustrates me with that is they have an overdue item and I send out a notice, and then all the other items that they have checked out that aren't due yet will also renew. Is that how you work it, or what do you
Yeah.
do?
Yeah, that's kind of how we work it. And we're okay with that. Yeah.
You're
I know
nicer than I am.
Yeah. Yes. We just let it renew, and so they could just bring back that one item. And I think that's why if there was a hold on an item, we don't necessarily want everything to come back from them. We just want that one item to come back. And I think it would really, I do see some problems in the system where something becomes lost and they were checking out they were checking out things. Well, I think it was previously. So we've stopped it a lot with the 7 days, and we're probably too lenient on people just telling us that an item was to return and taking their word for it. So I do see, yes, people can come in and then sit and have more items than they should because of just that one item and not just blocking it all. But we're going to live with it. We're going to let them check out, unfortunately.
There are several comments. This is quite a thread on YouTube. A lot of people are discussing the mechanisms of fine free and the advantages and disadvantages. Several people seem to have questions about what Christopher said. Christopher said that there are no collections in Koha. And I think I've clarified that for everybody in YouTube, because I think what you really meant to say was there is no built-in automatic mechanism in Koha for collection agencies. And I think that's what you meant, because I think that confused a lot of people. And then somebody asked a question about auto renew, and you just answered that. So perfect.
Yeah. And so I guess question to you, Christopher, do you have a bug that would about the fine that would just, you would want to mark a fine as like collection and not have it be removed by?
I can't remember if I've filed a bug. I know I've been talking with our vendor about that, Bywater, about that. So we have this active conversation, but I can't remember if I have a bug specifically yet, because this one is kind of, I don't know, a little nebulous. It's trying to pin down exactly what we need, because I mean, you know, there's no easy way for me to describe the situation that we're dealing with to and finding that balance between, you know, who can do, you know, when those fees get removed, and then we had the added complication of the collection agencies and when those things can be removed. And so it's, I kind of compromised at the moment. I'm kind of settling right now with where when you check those items in, when you click on the barcode and change the loss status of it so that we can delete those things, that's where we can remove it and it doesn't remove the fee. So we've kind of settled in that area, but I'm not happy with it because there's still the possibility of a staff member clicking on that barcode and changing it, or they're just checking the item in somewhere and that fee disappears. So, you know, it's still a conversation that we're having and trying to wrangle in, okay, what exactly needs to happen and how do we want to phrase this in a bug? So.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Any other questions, or can I leave the stage?
All right, you're free. Thank you.
Yay.